SGI has been named as MAD Canada's 2021 Citizen of Distinction. I'm joined to talk a little bit more about this with the spokesman for SGI, Tyler McMurtry. Tyler, thanks for being here today. First of all, can you just tell us a little bit more about what this recognition is?
This award essentially is given to groups, individuals, organizations that contribute to the anti-impaired driving movement in Canada. And SGI is obviously very honored to receive this award. It's a recognition of the efforts, not only by SGI, but of other groups working in partnership with SGI, law enforcement, groups like MAD and SAD and other organizations that all share that same goal of making our roads safer by eliminating the number one cause of fatality on Saskatchewan roads, which is impaired driving.
So how did SGI come to be nominated for this and then eventually win?
Well, we were nominated by MAD volunteers here in Saskatchewan, and that's something that we are tremendously grateful for, of course. We do a lot of work alongside MAD on a number of fronts when it comes to impaired driving. We partner with them on a number of initiatives. On the awareness side, we also, of course, work closely with law enforcement with our monthly traffic safety spotlights, which I frequently talk to the folks at Primetime Local about. And we often focus on impaired driving as a result of that as well. And there is also funding that SGI provides for traffic enforcement positions and equipment and resources for law enforcement to help them catch impaired drivers.
Now, SGI, as you mentioned, SGI partners with a lot of different groups to help not only get that message out there, but also, spread awareness and encourage people to not drive impaired. So how are things going when it comes to the traffic safety spotlights that focus on impaired driving and a lot of the work that SGI does?
Well, overall, when it comes to impaired driving, we have seen very significant progress in Saskatchewan over the past decade in particular, and that's a result of many of those partnerships that I referred to earlier, the work that we've done with law enforcement, increased awareness on the part of SGI and other organizations, but also legislation and enforcement play a role in that too. And so the results are our roads are getting safer, and that's great to see. Now, of course, when it comes to impaired driving, the fight isn't over, and it won't be over for some time as long as people still are making that decision to drive impaired. And we still see upwards of 400 people or more on average arrested or cited for an impaired driving offense in Saskatchewan every single month. So police wouldn't be catching that many people doing it if there weren't people doing it. But we have seen fewer people dying and being injured and causing collisions as a result of impaired driving. I'll just give you an example. In 2020, the most recent year we have complete statistics available, we saw 36 people lose their lives as a result of impaired driving collisions. Of course, that is far too many. We want to see that number at zero because impaired driving is 100% preventable. But that does represent a 35% drop over the average over the previous decade. So we have seen those numbers come down very significantly. From even 10 years ago, they were much higher, and they've been trending downward steadily. We need to keep that up. We also are seeing fewer people injured because fatalities are not the only measurement of whether our roads are safe. When you're talking about injuries, people getting very severely injured in road crashes, you obviously want to reduce those numbers as well. And we have seen a 31% drop in 2020 compared to the previous decade. So that is that's a very significant, and that's 31% drop over the average of the previous 10 years. So even those numbers are coming down. If you compare those numbers to a decade ago, the drop is even more significant. And that's great to see. We want to see those numbers continue to drop because, as I mentioned, impaired driving is 100% preventable. There's never a good reason to get behind the wheel if you're impaired. There's always a better choice. And so when we talk about the efforts that SGI has undertaken, it's great to see that those have been recognized. We're not the only ones talking about impaired driving. We're not the only ones fighting impaired driving. MAD is a big part of that as well. And that's why we're so pleased to partner with them on initiatives like the crashed car displays that we see in cities around Saskatchewan, the Smart Wheels bus that goes to schools and teaches young kids about the dangers of impaired driving before they're kind of at that age where they're going to be making those choices about consuming impairing substances, which I think, as we know, happens in high schools. There's a high school program that MAD delivers that SGI sponsors that goes to school assemblies and high schools. So there's a number of different partnership opportunities that we have with MAD and other organizations as well. But as I said, SGI is very, very honored by this award, but we realize that there is much more work to do.
Well, it's great to see that those numbers are going in the right direction. And while we have you here, Tyler, I'll give you a chance to kind of go through some tips for people. Obviously, it's pretty easy not to drive impaired. It's pretty simple, but what are some tips for people to keep in mind to help make that a reality?
Yeah, that's a great point. There's always a better option, but what we talk about always is making a plan before you are drinking or using drugs, doing anything that impairs your thinking, because you're making less good decisions when you're impaired. I think we're all familiar with how that works. So making a plan before you go out, and if you're in your community, if you have taxis or rideshare or public transit available, that might be an option. Or if you're going out with a group of friends or going to be hanging out with a group of friends, plan to have a designated driver. One person who stays sober gets everybody else home safe. Now, if you are in a position where somebody maybe hasn't made that plan and is looking like they're going to drive impaired, as your friend, as somebody who cares about them, as their friend, you need to be a good wingman. We talk about that all the time, the importance of stopping that person from getting behind the wheel where they might end up killing themselves or somebody else and making a decision that will affect them for the rest of their life, or or end their life as well. So that's another really important thing to consider.